Hi, and welcome to my presentation titled Tragedy of the Hills of the Sufri Hills Volcano. The volcano's name was Montserrat, and it is by me, Emily Tovar. So, what, where, when, where, when, and tectonic plate settings. So, it was taking place in the Caribbean. And if you kind of look down in the little island where residing in the Caribbean, you can kind of see where the volcano right here resides. So you can see it's more towards the down end, right? And you can see the Sufri Hills location down here. And right here it'll like show you pyroclastic flows connecting to the volcano and then some of the major roads along the lines. It erupted July 18th in 1995. And in terms of the tectonic plate setting, as you can imagine, most volcanoes come from convergent plates. In this specific setting, it was an oceanic and a continental plate converging. So your oceanic would be like the North American plate, and then your continental plate would be the Caribbean plate, kind of converging. And the North American plate would be the one being subducted under the Caribbean plate. And if you look at this image, this was taken a few hours, I believe, after the eruption. And it just kind of explains what we discussed in class of how a converging oceanic continental plate kind of looks like. And you can see the oceanic crust here, the North American plate kind of subducting underneath. So, activity leading up to the volcanic eruption. So, in summary, in terms of seismic activity, scientists kind of discovered that the volcano was made up of 4 andesite lava domes, and it was kind of already showing some previous activity in terms of like increase earthquake strength, heat flow, shifting gas, typical things you would see of a volcano kind of leading up to before an eruption. So when one of the highest points of the eruption that happened in 1994, when they saw another spike in those seismic graphs, they didn't really think anything of it because there were periods before of activity. So they just kind of considered like this isn't the eruption yet, but little did they know that it was going to erupt in 1995. So the indicated trigger of the volcano, almost like most volcanoes, there was like basalt and andesite kind of melting into magma and causing a pressure of magma inside of the volcano, causing it to kind of rise and again increasing the pressure. And some reports were that the bottom slopes of the volcano were kind of inflating, so there was like a change in the volcano's structure, and so that kind of indicates the pressure of the inside of the volcano right before it was going to erupt, and in terms of gas too. In the aftermath, once it kind of erupted, obviously there was a lot of ash clouds. There was new vents constantly opening, leading up to future minor eruptions, and some being catastrophic. You can mention some rock fall and some dome growth, right? And in terms of human impact, economical as well, and some life other than humans. So the ash fall would ultimately cause darkness in Plymouth for over an hour, because ash is pretty destructive. It doesn't sound destructive, you just hear ash in like your typical fires, but if you think about a whole bunch of ash of an eruption just that hasn't completely spread out everywhere, which it will spread out through pretty far acres, so it'll spread out pretty far. So the ash was mainly concentrated in Plymouth for a while, and it kind of just led to like a darkness. And after the volcano erupted, there was minor earthquake activity. And in terms of the what I previously talked about, future eruptions in the volcano, there was one in 1997 that had killed 19 people, left 18 injured, and there were 5 bodies recovered with severe injuries on them, and there were some people that had to get it amputated, and that can kind of tell you the catastrophic impact of that eruption following the 1995 one. It also destroyed a lot of homes, as you would think, and if you look at the image, you can see what a home would look like when the ash came in and how destructive this volcano was. And in terms of the ash fall, It affects a lot of things like water. It affects the power and your clothes. This ash was particularly very small, very, very small, that it was really hard to keep clean. So there was constant cleaning with the residents, right? And they would always keep their um, buildings closed because of how fast the ash would travel. And here again, I'm going to explain basically that the ash contained crystalline silica, which is very toxic to humans, right? So people were constantly at risk with respiratory health risks, I mean, especially with silicosis, right? It's something you really don't want. And it was especially dangerous for people who were outside. As you can see, this one home is covered in dust, right? And then if you look at the bottom of these people's feet, you can see all the ash piles and their footprints being left behind as they walk in the ash, and then residents having to wear masks, right? Some wildlife, well, not necessarily wildlife, more like insect life, were impacted, which could impact the vegetation and overall the habitability that made the environment basically uninhabitable, right? And because of all this ashfall making making like low shelters, and the vegetation wasn't that great, there was obviously like a decline in education, probably because there are not enough teachers, economic decline, and unavailability of shelter because residents were constantly leaving just because of the conditions on the island. So some facts. So people would actually fight over the ash, right? There was so much ash that they started giving each other basically responsibilities in terms of like property of the ash. So that can kind of give you an image of how much ash there was and how bad it was. Some families' homes were really destroyed by the ashfall, so you would see like random neighbors kind of sharing each other, and then you would hear children complain about being in the dark. And being in the dark, you know can get pretty tiring, and it was also pretty hot in there. And it was one of the residents actually reported that they were constantly using some kind of protective covering, like bags and sheets, anything they could just find to cover their food, to cover their cabinets, anything like technology where ash would like seep in, which would potentially like contaminate or affect its I'm looking for the word, affect its performance, right? Uh, in terms of response or like evolution or the way that they had kind of dealt with the impact, they did. I couldn't find much about it, but I did find that they started designing buildings without using as much metal because of how easily it would corrode with the presence of ash. So that can kind of tell you that residents that refused to leave obviously had to have some hardships, right? And in terms of resources, in this first one, in this one, if you want to find anything more about like leading up to the cause of the volcano or like any of the activity and some of the settings, you can look in here. And in terms of the impact of the pyroclastic surges, you can look at this one in terms of building damage. This is where I kind of pulled the images of some of the corroded buildings. And in this one, you can kind of find, the impacts of the ashfall. And then in this one, this one is very interesting. It gives like a local standpoint. It has information of what locals were reporting the living conditions to be like. Right here, you can find the insect impact, and over here, it'll kind of give you more information about the tectonic plate setting. And in this one, I pulled an image of the island, and over here there was an image of the eruption after a few hours. And thank you for watching.